What if I told you that the country most likely to decide whether China or America dominates Asia is not Japan? It's not India. It's not even Taiwan. It's a nation of 170 million people, squeezed between two giants, that the world spent decades calling a basket case. Its name is Bangladesh. And in 2026, something has happened that is quietly reshaping the entire power structure of Asia. Something that the mainstream media has almost completely ignored. This is not a story about a small country trying to survive. This is a story about a small country that just realized it holds all the cards. In this video, we are going to cover 4 things that you will not find neatly packaged anywhere else. First, why the fall of one woman from power triggered a geopolitical earthquake that is still being felt from Washington to Beijing. Second, why the Bay of Bengal, a body of water most people couldn't find on a map, is suddenly the most contested maritime zone on the planet. Third, whether Bangladesh is walking straight into a Chinese debt trap, or whether it is actually the one setting the trap. And fourth, the specific calculated moves Bangladesh can make that would turn it into South Asia's undisputed kingmaker for the next decade. Stay with me to the end, because the final prediction, what happens if Bangladesh gets this right, will genuinely surprise you. To understand where Bangladesh is going, you have to understand what happened in July-August 2024. For 15 years, Bangladesh's ex-Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina ran Bangladesh with an iron grip. And for 15 years, Sheikh Hasina ran its foreign policy on a single axis, New Delhi first, always. Bangladesh was, in practical terms, India's most loyal neighbor. Trade, intelligence, security, everything flowed through that relationship. And Beijing watched from a distance, patient, writing checks, waiting. Then, in the summer of 2024, Bangladesh's students took to the streets. What began as a protest against a quota system, a bureaucratic grievance, became something far larger. Within weeks, it became a revolution. Sheikh Hasina fled, not to a neighboring country, to India. That single fact, and that she ran to New Delhi, became the defining image of what the old Bangladesh had been. And it told the new Bangladesh exactly what it needed to reject. Into that vacuum stepped Nobel Peace Prize laureate Muhammad Yunus, heading Bangladesh's interim government. That immediately began rewriting Bangladesh's foreign policy from scratch. Dr. Muhammad Yunus didn't call New Delhi first. He went to Beijing. He signed agreements worth $2.1 billion on his first major state visit. He invited China into the Teesta River project, a move so geopolitically loaded that it sent alarm bells ringing through India's security establishment. And then, on February 12, 2026, Bangladesh held its first free and fair election since 2009, when Sheikh Hasina's government came to power. The Bangladesh Nationalist Party, the BNP, won a decisive 2/3 majority, a new government, a blank foreign policy slate, and every major power on earth, China, the United States, India, Pakistan, suddenly scrambling to get Dhaka's attention. That convergence of goodwill toward one small country, that is extraordinarily rare in geopolitics, and Bangladesh has never experienced anything like it before. The question is, does the new leadership understand what it is holding? Here's where it gets fascinating, because the reason every great power suddenly wants Bangladesh is not just politics. It's not just economics, it's geography. Raw, irreplaceable, unchosen geography of Bangladesh. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you about the Bay of Bengal will permanently change how you read the news about this region. The Bay of Bengal carries 30% of global maritime trade. 30%. Energy from the Gulf moving to East Asian factories. Manufactured goods heading back to Europe and America. Every day, billions of dollars of cargo pass through this water. And Bangladesh sits at the very top of it, like a watchtower overlooking the entire theater. Now here is China's problem, and it is a serious problem that Beijing has been quietly panicking about for 20 years. It's called the Malacca Dilemma. Former Chinese Premier Hu Jintao coined the term in 2003. The Strait of Malacca, the narrow channel between Malaysia and Indonesia, is where approximately 80% of China's energy imports pass through. Oil from the Middle East, gas from Africa. In a conflict with the United States, the U.S. Navy could theoretically seal that strait. And China's entire industrial economy would begin to suffocate within weeks. Beijing has spent 2 decades and hundreds of billions of dollars trying to solve this problem. The String of Pearls, a network of ports and infrastructure stretching from the South China Sea through the Indian Ocean. Hambantota Port in Sri Lanka, Gwadar Port in Pakistan, Kyaukphyu Port in Myanmar. But there is one location that solves the Malacca Dilemma better than almost any other. One country whose coastline and river systems could give China an alternative maritime and overland route to its landlocked western provinces of Yunnan and Tibet. Bangladesh. Chittagong Port, Mongla Port, and the Payra Deep Sea Port under development. These are not just trade facilities. To Beijing's strategic planners, they are lifelines. In October 2024, a Chinese naval fleet, including the warships Chittagong and Jinggangshan, made a goodwill visit to Chittagong. Bilateral meetings focused on naval cooperation, and China pledged $400 million to modernize the Mongla port. Now here is something the Chinese embassy probably doesn't advertise. The specific upgrades China is funding at Mongla Port are designed to increase capacity and efficiency in ways that would make the port accessible to naval vessels. For the United States, the picture is equally urgent. The U.S. Indo-Pacific Command has a problem that is rarely discussed publicly. Between the base at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean and Singapore to the east, there are almost no reliable friendly ports, no maintenance depth, no contingency access. Bangladesh's Bay of Bengal coastline fills that gap precisely. Dhaka's infrastructure at Chittagong Port and Payra Deep Sea Port could provide exactly what Washington needs, without requiring a formal military alliance, without requiring the political cost of a basing agreement. Both superpowers need Bangladesh. Neither can replace it. That is the definition of strategic leverage. But here's the dark side of that leverage that most analysts don't talk about. When two superpowers both want something from you, there is always a risk. Not the risk of being ignored, the risk of being consumed. Sri Lanka thought it had leverage over China too. Then it defaulted on its debt and woke up to find it had handed Beijing a 99-year lease on one of its most strategic ports. Is Bangladesh making the same mistake? Let's look at the numbers, because the numbers tell a story that Bangladesh's own officials are starting to admit out loud. According to the World Bank's International Debt Report 2025, Bangladesh's total external debt reached nearly $105 billion by the end of 2024. That is a 42% jump in just 5 years. External debt now stands at 192% of the country's export earnings. Debt service payments are consuming 16% of exports. And for the first time in the country's history, the 2025 national budget was smaller than the year before. The chairman of Bangladesh's National Board of Revenue said publicly, and I am paraphrasing only slightly, that the country has already fallen into a debt trap. The allocation for debt repayment in the national budget now exceeds what is spent on agriculture. It exceeds what is spent on education. Think about that for a moment. A country trying to develop, trying to feed its people, educate its children, build its future, is spending more money paying back foreign loans than investing in any of those things. The Sri Lanka comparison is not hysterical. In 2022, Colombo defaulted on its sovereign debt after unsustainable Chinese borrowing. The economic collapse was immediate and devastating. Pakistan has since gone to the IMF for a $7 billion bailout to repay debts accumulated under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Bangladesh is tracking eerily similar indicators to pre-default Sri Lanka. But, and this is crucial, Bangladesh is not Sri Lanka. Not yet. And here's why. China's direct loans account for roughly 7 to 10% of Bangladesh's total foreign debt. The rest is multilateral: World Bank, Asian Development Bank, Japan. The World Bank, as recently as May 2025, still rated Bangladesh as having a low risk of external debt distress. Bangladesh has, so far, repaid every Chinese loan on schedule. And the new BNP government has signaled clearly that it will review BRI commitments conditionally. Tariq Rahman's words were precise. If it benefits Bangladesh and supports the economy, we will make a decision. Not yes, not no. A conditional maybe. That language is not weakness. That language is negotiation. Here is the uncomfortable truth that Beijing knows, but won't say. China needs Bangladesh's geography more than Bangladesh needs any individual Chinese loan. The Malacca Dilemma gives Dhaka a veto that no contract can override. The question is whether Bangladesh's leadership is sophisticated enough to use it. Everything we've covered so far is context. Now comes the part that actually matters, because we've established the problem. We've established the leverage. Now I want to walk you through the specific moves, the actual strategic plays that could turn Bangladesh from a pawn into a kingmaker. And then I'm going to make 5 predictions about what the ripple effects look like if Bangladesh gets this right. These are not soft predictions. Some of them will be uncomfortable. All of them are grounded in what is already unfolding. Play 1, the port auction. Bangladesh has 3 major ports: Chittagong Port, Mongla Port, and Payra Deep Sea Port, each of strategic interest to a different power. China wants Chittagong Port and Mongla Port. The United States has expressed interest in Payra Deep Sea Port. India wanted a terminal at Mongla Port before China outbid them. The correct play is to never grant exclusive access to any of them. Run transparent commercial competitions. Force China, the US, India, and Japan into simultaneous bidding wars. Extract infrastructure investment from all sides without handing strategic control to any single power. The moment one power wins everything, the competition ends, and so does the leverage. Play 2. Turn the Malacca Dilemma into a negotiating tool. Bangladesh should be saying to Beijing openly, "We understand that we solve your most urgent strategic vulnerability. That understanding has a price. That price is converting existing loans to grants, reducing interest rates, mandatory technology transfer on every major project, and no military dimensions ever." China will push back, but it will ultimately comply because the alternative, losing access to Bangladesh's geography, is strategically unacceptable. Play 3. Weaponized defense procurement. In December 2025, the Bangladesh Air Force sent a letter of intent to Italy's Leonardo company for Eurofighter Typhoon jets, replacing its aging Chinese and Russian aircraft with European ones. That single decision sent a clear signal to Washington that Dhaka was open to Western defense relationships. By spreading future procurement across Western, Chinese, and non-aligned suppliers, Bangladesh keeps every military power engaged, extracts financing and training from each, and avoids the kind of singular dependency that locks a country into one security patron. Now, the ripple effects. What happens if Bangladesh executes this strategy successfully? Ripple effect 1. India is forced to compete. For the first time in decades, New Delhi cannot take Dhaka for granted. India will have to offer real concessions. The Teesta River water deal, improved trade terms, reduced border tensions. Not because Bangladesh demands them, but because the alternative is watching China and the US fill every space India vacates. A Bangladesh with options is India's greatest incentive to be a better neighbor. Ripple effect 2. The Bay of Bengal becomes a structured competition zone, not a Chinese lake. If Bangladesh maintains port diversification, neither China nor the US gains the exclusive maritime presence it seeks. The Bay remains a genuinely contested, genuinely open maritime corridor. That is good for global trade. It is good for regional stability, and it preserves Bangladesh's leverage indefinitely. Ripple effect 3. Bangladesh becomes the China +1 manufacturing capital of Asia. The US-China trade war and the global decoupling of supply chains from China is creating the largest manufacturing migration in modern history. Companies need somewhere to go that has cheap labor, port access, political stability, and Western-friendly trade relationships. Bangladesh already has a $50 billion garment export industry. With the right investment climate, it can absorb a significant share of the manufacturing that is leaving China. That economic base would, in turn, dramatically strengthen its negotiating position with every foreign power. Ripple Effect 4. A new South Asian architecture emerges, without India at the center. Bangladesh's ex-Foreign Affairs Minister advisor stated publicly that forming a regional bloc with Pakistan is possible, excluding India. Whether that specific bloc materializes or not, the direction is clear. A Bangladesh that is genuinely non-aligned is the anchor that a new South Asian economic architecture, one not dominated by Indian hegemony, could be built around. Ripple Effect 5. And this is the one that surprises people. If Bangladesh succeeds, it gives every other mid-sized nation in the developing world a template. A playbook for how a country that is not a great power can nonetheless extract maximum value from great power competition without being consumed by it. Bangladesh would not just be South Asia's kingmaker. It would be the world's most instructive case study in strategic sovereignty. Now, I need to be honest with you about what could go wrong, because geopolitics is not a chess game played in a vacuum. The greatest threat to Bangladesh's kingmaker ambitions is not China. It's not the United States. It's internal political instability. July 2024. Crimes against humanity committed by state law enforcement forces and the Awami League members during the movement to achieve the just demands of students, and various crimes, including disappearances and murders. During the last 15 years of the Awami League and Sheikh Hasina's regime, the Awami League's exclusion from the 13th National Parliament election 2026, the growing influence of right-wing political parties, which China has already begun cultivating through diplomatic back channels, a debt crisis that constrains the new government's room to maneuver. If the BNP government becomes preoccupied with domestic consolidation, if it begins making foreign policy decisions based on internal political survival rather than strategic logic, the window closes. And the window is not permanent. The US-China competition in South Asia is intense right now, but great power attention is finite. If Bangladesh spends the next 2 years looking inward while the competition evolves around it, it will find itself with commitments it didn't choose, and leverage it no longer holds. The clock is running. Here is the final thing I want to leave you with. Bangladesh's story in 2026 is not really about Bangladesh. It is about whether a country of 180 million people, a country that was once told it had no future, can look at the most dangerous geopolitical moment in a generation and see opportunity instead of threat. It is about whether strategic clarity can survive political chaos. It is about whether the Bay of Bengal becomes China's maritime highway, America's strategic insurance policy, or Bangladesh's greatest asset. The answer to that question will shape South Asia for the next 30 years. And it will be decided, not in Washington, not in Beijing, but in Dhaka. That's the full picture. Bangladesh in 2026, the geopolitical shockwave that the world is still catching up to. Do you think Bangladesh has the political discipline to pull this off? Or will it fall into the same trap as Sri Lanka and Pakistan? Leave your answer in the comments below. Because the Dhaka Diplomat channel is built on the idea that the best geopolitical analysis doesn't happen in think tanks. It happens when people who actually understand these regions talk to each other. If you found this breakdown valuable, if it gave you a perspective you hadn't considered before, please subscribe. We cover the geopolitical stories that the mainstream narrative misses with the depth they actually deserve. And if you want to go deeper on any of the threads we pulled in this video, South Asia geopolitics, India-Bangladesh relations, the Tiesta River project, and the US, that Indo-Pacific strategy, those videos are coming. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss them. Until next time, Stay informed, stay skeptical, and never stop asking who benefits.